But this week, we're going to do some graphing. And most of review. There might be two things. Can't remember else we did. I don't think we do algebra 2 graphing, absolute values, and I know we don't do parabolas that open right and left, but we're going to do that today. But anyway, just to get started, sure I'm on the, oh, there we go. I guess I didn't get to that point. All right, so just to get started, go through some vocab stuff. First of all, we call this the Cartesian coordinate plane. And we have this horizontal axis, what we call the x-axis. And this vertical axis we call the y-axis. And where they intersect is the point 0, 0, which we call the origin. And it splits the graph into 4 sections we call quadrants. And I've got them labeled first, second, third, and fourth quadrant. And when we plot a point, we call it an ordered pair because it's in alphabetical order. The x value is the first number, and the y value is the second, just like in the alphabet, x comes before y. So I plotted the point -3, -5 here in the third quadrant. So these are negative numbers for the x-axis, and to the right of the origin is your positive numbers, and then above the origin on the y-axis is your positive y values, and below is your negative y values. We all know that already, right? So just a quick review on some vocabulary that you guys already knew anyway. Right, Brody?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about any of that stuff? All right, cool. So, do I do that still here? I guess I don't. I guess I go to this one. All right, so the first two things we're going to talk about with some graphing and some points is two formulas, the distance formula and the midpoint formula. And the distance formula just helps us figure out the distance between 2 points on a graph. All right, and that formula is d equals the square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1, meaning the second x minus the first x, squared, plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. So x1, y1 represents the first point, and x2, y2 represents the second point. Okay? So the 2 points I'm going to find the distance between are -3 right there in the third quadrant, and 7, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. All right, so those are the 2 points that I'm going to use to find the distance between. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the formula. So x2 would be 7. That's the one I wrote second, so I'll call that x2. And x1 would be -3, and squared, right? And then y2 is positive 1 minus y1, which is also -3. And remember, you're supposed to square it. Well, what happens when you have minus and negative? We make it addition, right? So actually it's 7 plus 3 and 1 plus 3 ends up being. So then I get 10 squared plus 4 squared, which is 116. Now, if you want want, you can do the factor tree and do it in radical form. Or you can just do in your calculator the square root of 116. It's 10.8 if we round it. Go to tenths. Okay? So you're going to be finding the distance between 2 points. It's always positive. Remember, when I square something, it's positive. So if I would have gone the other way and went -3 minus 7, it would have been -10 squared. Well, that's still positive 100. Okay? Because it's -10 times negative. Two negatives when you're multiplying is a positive, right? But some of you might put it in your calculator like this and say it's -100. Okay? That's incorrect. All right? Remember, it's -10 times -10. Or it's 10 times 10. Okay? Either way, it's positive 100. Okay? You shouldn't get any negatives in here because it's a distance. The distance is always positive, right? Okay? Any questions on using the distance formula? Okay. Now, if you forget the distance formula, you guys always remember and most all of you should know this. Okay, what kind of triangle did I just make? A right triangle. You got a right angle down here, right? And we should all know the Pythagorean theorem. What is that, Dre? I thought everybody knew that. Well,
A squared plus B squared plus C squared.
yeah, that one. Well, this distance formula is this. Okay? If you call this side A and this side B and the hypotenuse we always call C, right? This distance is 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 squared. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 squared. 10 squared plus 4 squared is 116 equals C squared. What do I do to get C alone? You take the square root, right? So that's where that square root symbol comes from then. So if you forget the distance formula, you can draw it into a little right triangle and use Pythagorean theorem. You're doing the same thing. Does that make sense? Okay? But I know by the end of today, you guys will have that memorized anyway. That distance formula, won't you, Jake? Right. All those terms you guys have to memorize, you can memorize this. Okay? The other thing we're going to find between 2 points is the midpoint. Okay? Midpoint formula is this. See if I can squeeze it on here. All right, it's x1 plus x2. So you add them this time, divided by 2. X is not very good. And y1 plus y2 divided by 2. It's a point. So in distance formula, you subtract the x's and square them, subtract the y's, square them, and then add. In the midpoint, you add the x's and the y's and divide by 2. Okay? So the mistake some kids make is they might put the plus here because they're thinking a midpoint, or they might put minus here because they're thinking a distance. Okay? So just realize the difference between the two. So if I'm doing this problem, x1 was -3 plus x2, which was 7, divided by 2, and then y1, -3, plus y2, 1, divided by 2. Well, -3 plus 7 is 4, divided by 2 would be 2. And -3 plus 1 is -2, divided by 2 is -1. 2, -1. Does that green dot look about halfway between those? It does, doesn't it? Okay? So, those are the two formulas you'll use to find distance and midpoint. Any questions on using those formulas? We're good? Of course you're good, right? Look good, feel good? You are good. Okay. Questions? All right. Good job so far. All right, let's look at some graphing. All right, so y minus 2x equals 1. You're supposed to graph that, okay? First thing we usually do, about 90% of the time when we're graphing, is to get y by itself. All right, so what do we got to do first, Ty, to get y by itself?
Would you move stuff over?
Yeah. So what do I move? To get this by alone, got to move
2x,
Right.
make it positive.
All right, so add it. Good. Okay. For any equation that you have, you can graph it by making an XY table. This is how you learn for freshman year, the first time you saw graphing. Same as me, freshman year when I was in Algebra 1. This is how I was taught, like an XY table. Okay? You can pick any numbers you want for X. We call that the domain. All right? And then we find the Y values, which we call the range. All right? And when you first were taught, you were probably told to put -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 in there. All right? You can pick anything you want. I just take those three. Again, the reason they would pick those are easy to work with. Multiplying, adding, subtracting by 2s, 1s, and 0s is pretty easy, right? So when I put -1 in here, 2 times -1 is -2 plus 1 would be -1. And I put 0 in there. 2 times 0, 0 plus 1 is 1. And then I put 1 in there. 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay? When we just have an x and a y in it, no exponents, it's just a straight line. So -1, -1 is there. 0, 1 is there. And 1, 3 is here. So we just connect them. And we got our line. Remember, our line goes on forever, both directions. Okay, unless they tell us our domain is only from -1 to 1, then it would just be from that dot to that dot. Stop. Well, sometimes they'll restrict the domain on us, but most of the time, the domain's all real numbers. Anything you want to put in there, you can. Any questions on a straight line? Pretty easy, right? Some of you remember y equals mx plus b and don't need to make a table. B is the y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis, which is there. And then m is the slope. You rise and run, remember that? So if I wanted just to put that over 1, from there I could go up 2 and over 1, there's another point. If you remember that way, that's fine. Most people do it that way. But if you're not sure how to graph a problem, you can always go back to the XY table. So any complicated equation that you get, you can still graph it because you can pick some numbers for X to plug in and figure out the Y's, and then you have some points. Okay? Remember, a graph's a picture of all the solutions to the equation. So every point on this line, If I plug in for x and y, it will equal 1. Okay? Making sense? Coming back to you a little bit? Okay. Now, are we always just going to have x's and y's? No, we're going to get some x squared, y squared, stuff like that, right? So, also before we move on from there, if you get just y equals some number like 2, let's say, and no x in it, that's always a horizontal line through that number. If you get just x and no y in it, then it's a vertical line through that number. So that would be x equals -4, that purple line. The y equals 2 is that red line. Okay? So that's something you should remember. If you don't see an x in it, just a y, then it's horizontal. If you don't see a y in it, just an x, it's vertical. For the straight line stuff. The slope of a horizontal line is 0. You rise 0 and run as much as you want. 0 divided by something, 0. On a vertical one, you can rise whatever you want, but you're running 0. So you're dividing by 0. So we usually say a vertical line slope is undefined, or no slope. Okay? The horizontal line slope is 0. Vertical line is undefined. Questions? All right, so here's another one. This time, we got the x being squared. Still have x and y, but see if I can pull that down. Yeah, there we go. So here the x is being squared. Anybody remember what that looks like? Did a lot of that stuff last year. Called quadratics. They look like U's. Upside down U's. Remember what they're called? Parabolas? Yeah. Good. All right. So again, get y by itself. And then use your xy table. So when I got y by itself, I get x squared plus 1. So I'll make an xy table. I'll just use those 3 again. See what happens. When I put -1 there and I square it, -1 times -1 is +1, plus 1 give me a 2. When I put 0 in there, 0 squared is 0, plus 1 is 1. When I put 1 in there, I get 1 squared, which is 1, plus 1 is 2. So I get -1, 2, 0, 1, and 1, 2. You know, if you go the -2 or the positive and the +2, -2 squared is +4 plus 1 is 5. And +2 squared is 4 plus 1 is 5. So if you need more, you can always do that. -2, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you see our U for our parabola. Okay? You can also do this, right? So your y equals button, x squared plus 1, hit enter, and then hit graph, right? That's what that graphing calculator can do for you, right? It can help you out. I don't have a problem with you doing that, using your calculator to help you. Okay? Remember, if you hit second graph, there's your table of values, that we made. Okay, so there's from -3 to +3. So you have some points that you can plot if you need to find some points. Any questions? So far, so good? Coming back to you a little bit, hopefully? All right, so we got parabolas. Okay. Sometimes we get y squared. We didn't have this last year. We always had x squared. We never did a y squared. Okay? So, if I get y by itself, Audrey, what do I have to do? How do I get rid of that squared? Yeah, square root. So we get y. Now remember, when we do this part, when we take the square root of both sides, we always got to remember to do plus or minus. Right? That's something we're supposed to remember to do when we're solving an equation and we take the square root of both sides. Okay, so if I make my XY table and thinking about square roots, can I have negatives, take the square root of negatives? Is that actually possible? Not really, right? I mean, we can, because we can take what letter out? It's a negative under the radical sign. That I, remember the imaginary unit? We've done that already this year, right? Okay, but to graph, we're not going to be able to graph where, 3i is. It's imaginary, right? We're just going to do positives. And let's be smart about this. Let's use nice numbers. What are nice numbers that I can put in there? 0, not 2, 4, 1, 9, right? Why? You want to use perfect squares. Make it easy on yourself, right? So I'm going to just use 0, 1, 4, and 9. Because I know the answers to all this. What's the square root of 0? What's the square root of 1? But it's plus or minus, right? What's the square root of 4? Plus or minus 2, square root of 9. So watch what happens when I graph that. Those points. 0, 0, 1, positive 1, and negative 1. 4, 2, 3, 4, positive 2, negative 2. 9, positive 3, negative 3. So it's a parabola again, but which way does it open? So when it's a y-squared parabola, it opens right or left. Okay? Last year, all we ever looked at was the up or down ones, the x-squared ones. Okay? So, but we can still do this type of problem. Okay? In your calculator, you got your y equals, you got to do the positive and the negative to get both of them. All right? So you do square root of x, and then you got to do negative, because you can't, there's no plus or minus symbol we can use, so we put negative square root of x. And then when I graph it, it'll do the positive one first, and then the positive half first. It'll do this, and then it'll do that for you. What happened there? Oh, I used the answer. I hit second. All right. Delete that. Insert negative. There we go. Okay? And again, if you go to the table, it'll give you negatives will be errors because they can't take the square root of negative, so it'll just be your positive. So, there's your 0, your 1, go to 4, there's your 2 and negative 2. There's your 9, your 3 and negative 3. Okay, so you can still do that on your calculator. But to graph on this calculator, you got to get y by itself, right? You got to hit the y equals button. All right, questions on that? All right, so again, it's something we can still handle. Once we get y by itself, make your little table. All right. Questions? Okay, so I got to pull this graph down. Absolute value graphs. I don't think we did these last year. Trying to remember. I know we haven't hit them yet in algebra 2. But just do the same thing. Make an XY table. If I just put those three in, let's see what happens. What's -1 minus 2? -3, but what's the absolute value of -3? +3. What's 0 minus 2? -2. What's the absolute value of -2? 2. 1 minus 2? -1. Absolute value? 1. So if I did this, just those, just looks like a straight line, doesn't it? Well, actually, these aren't just straight lines. Oh, here's some more. I forgot to erase, I guess. Let's add a few more in there. Let's add 2, 3, and 4. So 2 minus 2 is 0. The absolute value of 0 would be 0. 3 minus 2 is 1. The absolute value is 1. 4 minus 2 is 2. The absolute value is 2. So I got a 2, 0, and then a 3, 1, and a 4, 2. So it kind of changed directions on us, didn't it? That's what's always going to happen on an absolute value. It's going to be a V. So it's got a point. You know, the parabola kind of is a curve, a kind of smooth curve. When it's an absolute value, it's a V. Okay? So it's like that. Now, just like parabolas that open up or down, absolute values could open up or down. How did you guys remember how we knew it opened up? Yeah, positive number in front of the x squared, right? And we opened up that A value we talked about, A, B, and C. If the A value was negative, it opens down. Well, that's the same with absolute values. If it's a positive out front here, there's no symbol, it's going to be a V. If there's a negative sign out front of it, it's going to be upside down V. Okay, and you can do absolute value on your calculator. Let me show you. All right, so you go to your y equals, okay, and then go to math. And move over to NUM. I call it number. All right, and that first one there says ABS. That's for absolute value. Some of you that have the newer ones, it might even just have the absolute value symbol. Okay, but you just put enter, and then whatever's in the parentheses is whatever you have between your absolute value symbols. So I just put x minus 2, and then close it up. So the calculator knows you're taking the absolute value of x minus 2. And then when you graph it, you'll get that V that we got. Okay? And then again, if you need some points, you know, for a table, just to see where to plot them, you know, there's some points like we were doing. Okay? Again, if I put a negative sign, in front of that, it just be upside down. Okay? Questions on absolute values or the right and left parabolas? When the y is squared, goes right and left. X is squared up and down on the parabolas. Absolute values are V's or upside down V's. Distance formula and midpoint formula. The last thing are intercepts. Okay? Now if we go back to this one, we can't see our x and y axis like this one. This has a y-intercept of 1 or 0, 1. That's where it crosses the y-axis. It doesn't have an x-intercept because it didn't cross the x-axis. That's what x and y-intercepts are. You guys remember that, don't you? If we look at this one down here, we had a y-intercept of 2 and an x-intercept of 2. where it touches the X and Y axis. Those are intercepts. So remember, this point is 2, 0. And this point is 0, 2. The y-intercept, x value is always 0. X-intercept, the y value is always 0. That's why you already have half the point. You should know what half of it is. So you just plug 0 into the equation for y, and you'll know the x-intercept. If you plug 0 into the equation for x and find y, then you'll know the y-intercept. Okay? So sometimes they'll ask you to graph a line and just find the two intercepts. Then you know it's a straight line. If it's an x squared in it, you know it's a parabola. If it's a y squared, it's also a parabola. But it's probably going to have it could have an x and y intercept, depending where it's at. So that's what you do for intercepts. You just plug in 0 in for the other variable to find the x-intercept, plug 0 in for y. Y-intercept, plug 0 in for x. You might have a couple problems like that where they'll ask you to find the intercept. Okay? Questions? Been doing a lot of talking, I know. You guys have been really quiet. You understand, okay? Just like review stuff? Hopefully. A couple new things. All right, there's your assignment. 6 to 42 by 3s, you don't have to do 15 or 18. We will have a quiz this Friday. It'll be over this graphing stuff. Well, you could have told me earlier so it didn't get dried out. All right, so graphing to this week, distance, midpoint. Tomorrow we're going to graph circles. I think we did that last year. Maybe not. I can never remember when I do it for CP if we do it in algebra